Hello, this is Dr. Grande. In today's video, I'm going to be taking a close look at the symptom criteria for schizotypal personality disorder and providing some specific examples of those criteria. If you find this video to be interesting or helpful, please like it and subscribe to my channel. That way you won't miss any new videos. Now, a while back, I made a video on schizotypal personality disorder, and I saw a comment from a subscriber that indicated that they wished they had more specific examples provided in that video. And I remember when I was making the video and going through the symptom criteria, I was thinking to myself that these symptom criteria aren't really self-explanatory. And I gave a few examples, but not really that many. So I thought that was a good idea, and I appreciate that subscriber's comment. And here I'll be going through each of the symptom criteria and giving more specific examples. Now, not really all the symptom criteria will have a lot of examples because some of them are more or less self-explanatory, but some of the ones that are a little more complex, a little bit more esoteric, I'm going to go through those. So first I'm just going to run through the 9 symptom criteria with schizotypal personality disorder. We have ideas of reference, odd beliefs, magical thinking, unusual perceptual experiences, odd thinking or speech, suspiciousness or paranoid ideation, inappropriate or constricted affect, a behavior or appearance that's peculiar, odd, or eccentric, a lack of close friends, and excessive social anxiety due to paranoid fears. Now, as I mentioned, not all of these really need a lot of explaining, but a few of them are particularly difficult to understand. And let's start with the beginning, the first symptom criterion, ideas of reference. Now, ideas of reference become easily confused with psychosis, hallucinations, and of course delusions of reference. With this term, ideas of reference, this really comes down to 2 things. One is an unusual connection between unrelated events. So sometimes this involves confusing cause and effect, and sometimes it's just taking 2 events that have nothing to do with one another and putting them together. So an example might be an individual with this disorder may be driving along and see a big sale on car tires. And then later on, they may see a news story where an accident occurred and it was caused by tire failure. And they may connect those 2 by thinking that the place that was selling the tires was adding new tires, and therefore other tires had to fail. There's no reason those 2 events would be connected, but they might make that connection anyway. Another example of an idea of reference is when an external event has some sort of special meaning to that individual. And this is above and beyond just being reminded of something. So an example here would be, say an individual with this symptom was watching television, and it was a television show where people were exercising. They might think that's a special message to them, or that their lack of exercising caused that television show. So they may go on this effort to become physically fit. Now, this is much different than if someone's watching this show and they see people exercising and they think to themselves, well, I should really work out more. That's not an idea of reference. With the idea of reference, that television show would have some sort of special connection to that person. The next symptom criterion is the odd beliefs or magical thinking. And here a lot of times we think of superstitiousness, telepathy, and one of the examples we see from case studies and from the literature is a real commitment to the idea of paranormal activity and believing that this has an influence in daily life. Now again, there are a lot of people that do not have schizotypal personality disorder that believe in the paranormal. But it's really the degree to which that belief influences the person's life and the degree to which it's applied by that individual. So for example, if they believe that ghosts are all around us and they take certain precautions not to anger the ghosts or not to encounter the ghost, and this is something that interferes with functioning, that would be really more consistent with this symptom criterion than simply someone believing in the paranormal. Now, with the magical thinking, oftentimes this involves the individual believing they have control over other people's minds. And this is linked to the ideas of reference. So an individual may be in a supermarket and see somebody select a particular item off the shelf. And they may think that they caused that by thinking about that item, that they had some control over that person's choice. Another element we see with this criterion is magical rituals. For example, if somebody knocks on a door 5 times, so every time they go and knock on a door, they knock on it 5 times because of some magical belief, because they believe they need to in order to stay out of trouble with magical forces. That could be part of this symptom criterion. This becomes easily confused with what we might see in obsessive compulsive disorder. Now, if somebody with obsessive compulsive disorder knocked on a door 5 times, that would be a counting ritual. That would be in order to satisfy an intrusive thought, not because there was a magical reason, not because they believed they had to be concerned about that magical reason and therefore they knocked on the door. So it's easy to confuse this with some of the obsessions and compulsions we see with OCD. Now, the third symptom criterion is unusual perceptual experiences. And again, this one is easily confused with psychosis and hallucinations, as we saw with ideas of reference. A lot of times we see this manifested through an individual hearing someone whisper their name or hearing somebody whisper something and that person's not there. Another example of this is when an individual feels like someone is in the room with them. They sense the presence of another human being, even though there's no one in the room. So again, it kind of borders on psychosis or hallucination, but unusual perceptual experience is a different construct. The fourth symptom criterion is odd thinking or speech. And again, with this criterion, as with many of these others, there's overlap with the other criteria. Now, with this one, we usually see someone creating new versions of a word, so using a word in a way it wasn't intended. One way to think about this is turning a verb into a noun or an adjective into a verb. Another feature we see is when an individual is extremely abstract in the way they speak. And another example is if an individual adds words in a conversation and those words have no value, or they actually detract from what the individual is trying to communicate. So these extra words, whether they're used correctly or not, just confusing the narrative. The fifth symptom criterion is suspiciousness or paranoid ideation. And with this one, this is pretty similar to what we see with paranoid personality disorder and what we see sometimes with schizophrenia. Now, this can manifest a number of ways. Somebody can be concerned about infidelity. They can believe that somebody's cheating on them. They can believe that they're being followed. Also here, there's a special significance we sometimes see. So somebody can believe that they have special significance and that's why they're being followed. For example, if we connect this back to odd beliefs, they could believe that because they understand where ghosts are or what ghosts are doing, that the government is following them to find out more about the ghosts. So you have this special significance piece that's also wrapped in sometimes with this symptom criterion. And also sometimes this ties over to the excessive social anxiety we see with the last symptom criterion. Again, that's usually based on paranoia. The sixth symptom criterion is inappropriate or constricted affect. So a lot of times we see this in the form of eye contact. So somebody makes too much eye contact, too little, or they have a blank stare. We can also see this in terms of the expression of emotions. For example, if throughout a conversation someone is smiling and laughing, even though the content isn't funny or upbeat. We also see sometimes this decrease in emotional reactivity. So if someone is telling a sad story, a depressing story, and the individual does not react, they don't seem to connect with the content of the story in terms of that emotional reaction, that would be an indicator. Now, this is really a deficit in emotional reactivity, and also it ends up looking like a problem with interpreting social cues. Also, sometimes here we see a struggle in the flow of conversation. Because of this constricted affect, somebody has a real problem maintaining a normal flow in a conversation. They seem like they're socially awkward due to this decreased emotional reactivity or constricted affect. The seventh symptom criterion is behavior or appearance that's odd, peculiar, or eccentric. And this takes on many different forms. So what are some different behaviors we see with this symptom criterion? Well, one thing we see is if an individual wears all of the same color all the time. For example, if they always wear black, regardless of the context, or whatever combination of colors they wear it in every situation. So it's consistent. So they're always wearing a heavy coat, they're always wearing a hat and gloves, even though it's warm outside. Another example of this is wearing many layers of clothing, particularly if the layers don't progress in a way that we would normally think as logical. For example, wearing undergarments on the outside. We can also see this expressed when an individual carries one type of item in excess. For example, if somebody carries 7 or 8 purses, even though they may not be used, they may be empty, but that's considered kind of a fashion statement that they're making, like that's the way they might refer to it, or they might think that they need them to connect to one of those other symptom criteria, like it might be an odd belief, or it might be a concern about magic or something like that. But this is another characteristic we see sometimes with this. Another indication here with the symptom criteria is when an individual's type of dress seems disheveled. That's part of this symptom criterion in some cases. Now, the 8th symptom criterion is a lack of close friends. This is one of those criterion that's relatively self-explanatory. Individuals with schizotypal personality disorder typically don't have close friends. If they do have a close friend, oftentimes that's a first-degree relative. And the last symptom criterion is excessive social anxiety because of paranoid fears. So with this symptom criterion, someone is anxious in social situations, and over time, that anxiety doesn't diminish because they're worried about what people might do. It's a paranoia type reaction. Usually when we think of social anxiety, we think the more that an individual is around other people, the better they're going to feel. Kind of like the main focus of exposure therapy. And oftentimes that is successful. With this symptom criterion though, as I mentioned, that social anxiety doesn't go away. It actually only gets worse. So this is expressed differently, this anxiety is expressed differently in schizotypal personality disorder than we see with social anxiety disorder, for example. So those are the 9 symptom criteria for schizotypal personality disorder. I hope you found the more detailed description and the examples I used with these symptom criteria to be helpful. Thanks for watching.